The very first episode of Solo Leveling set the tone for the series when Sung Jinwoo and about a dozen other hunters entered the double dungeon, and only half of them came out alive. That's because from the moment they stepped foot in that dungeon, their lives were at the mercy of the massive statue of God in the back of the temple. This statue is the core motivation for Jin Wu wanting to become stronger and a top-level hunter in his own right. But as powerful as it is, the statue of God isn't exactly conscious. It is a statue at the end of the day, a puppet controlled by a dangerous puppet master that created not just the statue and the dungeon, but also the entire system itself. In this video, we're going to take a look at the origins of the mysterious architect, how he got involved with Jin Wu's life, and why. So, here's your spoiler warning, because there's going to be a lot of those in this video. The creator of the double dungeon that Jin Wu missed, the architect's unseen debut. Everyone involved in the first couple of Solo Leveling episodes was too busy trying to survive to notice that the entity that was actually trying to kill them was standing right there. No, not the statue of God or any of the other murder statues that populated the room. We're talking about the angel that held up the tablet inscribed with instructions for the Kartanon Temple. At the beginning of Solo Leveling, no one that enters the double dungeon has the kind of mana sensitivity required to suss out this fact. But after spending a lot of time leveling up and clearing instant and regular dungeons by himself, Sung Jinwoo has increased his stats to the point he could sense the source of magical energy in any given room. So, when he came back to the Kartanon Temple after crossing level 100, he could immediately tell that the statue of God was actually a puppet. His real attacker had 6 wings and loved playing statue, and Jinwoo was getting tired of his coyness. He called out the architect for trying to hide himself, but that's when the dungeon monster revealed that he wasn't hiding as much as he was waiting. Waiting for what, you might ask? Well, waiting for Jin Wu to strut his stuff. Dungeons in Solo Leveling are gateways to dimensions where magical creatures run rampant. Usually there's no rhyme or reason to their appearance, and the more mana a dungeon emits, the higher the risk associated with it. But the double dungeon was clearly special because it appeared within a D-rank dungeon, yet it clearly had an S-rank difficulty. Most human hunters that had managed to discover it didn't live to tell the tale, except Jinwoo's group. Once Jinwoo saved his comrades using his ceaseless wit and fearless decision-making, he was rewarded with becoming the player of the system, not out of coincidence, but because he passed every observable metric for becoming a player. The only thing that could have made that observation that was present in the room and not engaging anyone else is the architect's statue. This fact will likely not be addressed in Season 1, considering we're already getting close to its end, but it is important to keep in mind because it explains a lot about the history of Solo Leveling supernatural creatures and the real reason Jin Wu is a solo leveler in the first place. Who is the architect? Why did he create the double dungeon and the system? The core conflict of Solo Leveling isn't between the hunters and the dungeon monsters that they spend so much of their personal time closing down, it's between two groups of supernatural entities with otherworldly powers. A long time ago, an all-powerful godlike entity called the Absolute Being created 2 races of creatures just to have them fight each other so he could be entertained. One race he kept loyal to himself, the other he gave independence. The first group came to be known as the Rulers because they drew their powers, personalities, and purpose from the Absolute Being himself. The other group came to be known as the Sovereigns or Monarchs, considering their incredibly individualistic agendas. The Rulers and Monarchs fought each other in a bloody war that saw countless cosmic entities perish, until one day the Monarchs got an unprecedented advantage. One of the Rulers turned on his kinsmen and joined up with the Monarchs, becoming their most powerful member in a short period of time. This ruler, who was now known as the Shadow Monarch, was so powerful that some of his Monarch allies turned on him because they were scared of his power. But eventually, the Shadow Monarch recovered, and when the Monarchs chose Earth as their next invasion station, he was approached with a plan to help him take over that world. The Rulers would manifest their power by turning human beings into their vessels, so the Monarchs decided they were going to do the same thing. But the Shadow Monarch's powers were too abundant for a human body to contain, and that's where the Architect comes in. He was a mage in service to one of the Monarch Kings before he heard of Ashborn's plight. Ashborn is the Shadow Monarch's name, by the way. When he did, he offered to create a system that would help him choose, train, and eventually take over a human being that perfectly matched the requirements for becoming the next Shadow Monarch. Now, you might be asking yourself, what would the Architect get out of this deal? And the answer is, or at least what we think he was looking for, was ingratiation. We don't know much about the Architect's backstory before he came to Earth with the Monarchs, but it isn't too difficult to understand that he clearly wanted to see them succeed and witness them rise to the top of the food chain, even in a planet as manaless as Earth. It could have been that collective sense of impressing his masters whilst etching his name in the history books that motivated the Architect to do what he did. After years of observation, Jin Wu was chosen not by the architect, but by the Shadow Monarch himself, given he possessed immense courage even though he was a weakling. Once Sung got the system, it did everything in its power to catch him up to Ashbourne's level. The architect designed its interface to match a virtual reality RPG's gameplay because he knew this would keep the player engaged without giving them too much of a hint about what was actually going on within their bodies. As the creator of the system, the architect had exclusive access to it, alongside Ashbourne, which both of them can use to control what happens when a player makes the wrong choice. And once they reach a certain level where their physical bodies are ready to bear Ashbourne's powers, the player is invited back to the Cartenon Temple for the final test. The true boss fight of the Double Dungeon, Jin Wu versus the Architect. Like we mentioned a few moments ago, once Jin Wu reached level 100, he was invited back to the Cartenon Temple. But this is because he'd met all the baseline requirements for getting his body possessed, and now he needed to prove that he could put them to good use by passing one final test. Jin Wu was told that he has to defeat every single statue in the Double Dungeon, including the Statue of God. And if he manages to do that, he's going to have to defeat the Architect himself, who's an S-rank dungeon boss at the very least. In episodes 1 and 2, Jin Wu thought that the Statue of God was the worst thing he'd ever faced. If the Architect had attacked him back then, his opinion would have certainly changed. Armed with 6 angelic wings that he can turn into limbs at will, the Architect isn't just a sorcerer, he's a warrior as well. He can wield different types of weapons with each arm and is extremely proficient at using them as well. The Architect's strength and speed are high enough to surprise Jin Wu, who has surpassed legendary S-rank hunters like Cha Hei-in and Choi Jong-in in all aspects of physicality and sorcery. That, coupled with his control over every other statue in the building, makes him one of the toughest solo leveling villains, hands down. If his plan to incarnate the Shadow Monarch onto Earth in a friendly body went the way he'd envisioned it would, then he could have laid claim to the title of Best Evil Genius in anime and manhwa history. Alas, he didn't bother to gauge that aspect of their arrangement until it was too late, and he was locked out of the system he himself had created. In the end, the Architect died a punk's death because he couldn't even lay a finger on his opponent. Well, Jin Wu absolutely crushed and exposed him. We don't know which monarch encouraged him to work with Ashbourne, but whoever it was clearly knew the Shadow Monarch's strength, if not history. If they'd done their research on the latter, perhaps the Architect's most diabolical creation might have fallen into someone else's hands. But because it fell into Jin Wu's, it was only a matter of time before he managed to solo level his own creator. Marvelous verdict! The Architect is one of the most enigmatic characters in solo leveling because, while we know next to nothing about him, he has influenced its world directly and indirectly for decades. If he didn't exist, it's hard to tell whether Jin Wu could have ever reached his full potential. At the same time, realizing that potential came at the cost of several human lives, so what worth can you put on the potential of a homicidal maniac like that? We know our answer, but what we're more interested in knowing is yours. What did you think about this video? Do you want more solo leveling content from Marvelous Anime? Let us know in the comments section down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, keep leveling up.